Because once I start to move, ain't no force in the universe that can stop me. Here's your relook at the Diamond Select Marvel Select Juggernaut Special Collector's Edition action figure. Sculpted by Gentle Giant, the unstoppable Juggernaut is one of the most powerful men to walk the earth unhindered, literally. When King Marco states that nothing can stop the Juggernaut, he's not kidding. Finding a mystical ruby in the Lost Temple in Korea, U.S. Army soldier King Marco read aloud the inscription on the gem. Whoever touches this gem shall be granted the power of the Crimson Bands of Sidorak. Henceforth, who shall read these words shall become forevermore a human juggernaut. Charles Xavier's half-brother became an unstoppable force soon after joining Magneto in the fight against the X-Men and anyone else that dared stand in their way. Juggernaut is quite the big boy, but how tall is this big boy? Let's find out by taking the tape measure and putting it right to the very top of his domed helmet. Stopping the Ultra Measure-Tron 5000 right to the very top, right there. You're looking at a very towering presence of the Juggernaut standing impressively at 9 inches exactly. That's pretty tall. Switching that over to centimeters, immediately, I can tell you, the figure stands almost 23 centimeters, 22.9 to be exact. Okay, so let's look at the rather less than impressive thing that comes included with the Juggernaut. While as good as this figure may be, unfortunately the plastic, I guess, utilized on this figure kind of meant that everything else had to be sacrificed that came included with the figure. Case in point, he does come with this rather small, embarrassing looking back diorama. I get for the fact, again, that they used as much plastic as they did for this unstoppable Juggernaut, but unfortunately the resulting is a display stand that's just kind of ho-hum. Sure, the artwork looks good, and you get 2 sides to choose from. One is an explosion. I think it's actually him leaping, because it looks almost like these are clouds, but there's kind of an explosion happening in the background there. Or you can go with this effect, the debris and remnants of the city, now that the Juggernaut has run through it. Either way that you slice it, it runs along this groove slot in the bottom of this display stand. And again, the display stand itself is just a strip of brown plastic. Airbrushed or dry brushed at the very least with some lighter colors of brown, but there's really not a whole heck of a lot happening with the base itself. I mean, if anything, I think I might have even joked when I first had a look at this figure at kind of describing this to be Juggernaut's little flat screen TV, and it kind of really does look like that. I mean, again, for all the things that Diamond Select have released over the years, I'm sure you could probably find a good enough display stand. There's been a couple of good ones with Spider-Man, like the crushed car you could probably utilize with this particular figure, that this display stand is really just an afterthought, and not one that I would be likely displaying with a figure like this. Despite the shortcomings of a rather disappointing display stand, the figure itself is rather impressive. Yes, astute viewers will know that I've already had a look at this figure before. Unfortunately, though, I think I ultimately sold him, which would probably explain to then many of you why at the very beginning of this review there was a sealed packaging. I ended up having to result in going back out to the comic book store and finding this guy, which is one good thing that Diamond Select does regularly. Both Diamond Select and NECA Toys generally do redistribute a lot of their figures. That Juggernaut is now starting to surface again in local comic book stores. Certainly here in Canada, I would imagine that we painted with a broad brush across many places as well. So if you did miss your chance the first go around to get such an impressive figure like Jugs here, well, you can go ahead and certainly go to your local comic book store, and he should be sitting on the shelf right now. Probably not literally sitting, well, he probably should be sitting on a shelf because the figure packaging is heavy. Once you factor in how much weight this figure takes up, it's not likely hanging from a peg. And you'll also notice with the particular packaging that they also offer up little plastic studs on the side sections where it's been glued, just to reinforce it in case this figure falls out of the packaging. Certainly an argument to be made for the ongoing loyalty that Diamond Select has for their collectors. The fact that you could pick up a figure like this for the same price point as what you would pick up, say, for a Marvel Select Spider-Man. It questions, of course, the price point for then picking up the Spider-Man, but it certainly does say for the amount of plastic that they use for a figure like this, spending the $34.99 or the $35.99 here in Canada, I certainly don't mind spending that if it means restocking one of my all-time favorite figures. I can't even imagine why I sold this guy in the first place, or I might have even given him away. Needless to say, he is back in my possession, and Cain Marko has never looked finer. Let's have a look at the figure itself, which again is a big, bulky mass of plastic. Picking him up feels like you're picking up a bag of flour. Literally not fooling either. The look of Marko, here depicted as Juggernaut, is one of quite an impressive looking figure. It, I think, easily trumps some of the stuff that we were getting from Marvel Legends. Marvel Legends did have a Build-A-Figure Juggernaut, which was good, don't get me wrong. But I have to say, if I'm going to be putting my money out for anything, it likely would be going the direction of this guy, and not necessarily picking up multiple figures to build a Juggernaut that isn't as impressive, if you ask me. Let's have a look at his face portrait, and then we'll kind of work our way down. There is an unmasked version, a Cain Marko unmasked version of Juggernaut that is available as well. I don't know if it's actually been a Disney Store exclusive or simply just a variant that you could source out and find. But at the end of the day, what I would ask of myself if I look to pick up this guy again, I would be just more wanting the look of Juggernaut with the helmet intact. You've got, of course, the little rivet points around the sections of his helmet. Let's go ahead and flip that all the way around so you guys can see it. The plastic itself looks like it's been used in a dark brown color, and they simply have dry brushed some gold on top of that. The helmet isn't perfect, which certainly adds to the appeal of Juggernaut. If he is, after all, running through things, you can imagine that his helmet is going to be protected. Sure, the body is, but the helmet itself would have indentations and imperfections to it. You can see these welts of bubbled up plastic to kind of look as if there's been some hammered out or banged out parts of the helmet as a result of him, of course, running through things. The helmet, if you look at the underside, does look almost as if you could remove it, but it's completely intact. In fact, the only thing that would be there is probably just the front faceplate of Marko. Well, like the whole back of it would simply just be unfinished. So again, if you wanted to go with the unmasked version, by all means, source that out, but I'm perfectly content going this route. The familiar colors are still present here on Juggernaut, the browns and this kind of red color that makes up its torso section. The striping kind of reminds me of, I think, Baron Zemo's mask, though not necessarily this color. The red, it does a nice job of breaking up, and otherwise pretty much a brown, brown coloring across all the surface of his costume. The fabric itself, though it doesn't quite, of course, look like fabric, it has a certain bit of reflection to it that I'm looking at it, kind of looks a little bit like leather. Of course, it is obviously plastic. They've dry brushed some additional coloring there, some darker black and darker grays and stuff like that added into like the little recessed areas so that the musculature does stick out a little bit more. I do really like the fact that they've added a bit of a sheen to the costume and not given a really matte surface. This works extremely well on this particular figure, and it works all the way down his legs, all the way down to his very large tree trunk sized boots. My only one nitpick could be for the fact that he doesn't have pegals on the undersides of his feet, but gosh darn it, that's really asking a lot of display stands anyways to be able to hold such a mammoth-sized figure. I was able to pull off at the very intro of this review the fact that you could get him in a running pose, and I still feel like you could pull that off, although unfortunately with the feet becoming slightly loose over, I guess, the time that they've released this figure and re-released him yet again, there's a little bit of wobbling that's had as a result of like these feet maybe being remolded. There could be some mold wear resulting in these feet being slightly looser than I like. Of course, Juggernaut does have the mammoth-sized arms. Everything on this guy is large, all the way down to his catcher mitt-sized hands. Look at the size of these hands. And while he doesn't have any necessarily grabbing action, I mean, I don't think Juggernaut, I would imagine, as someone that's going to be grabbing and throwing things around. He's simply just going to run straight through it. He's got the bands of metal wrapping around both his bicep and his forearm section, and he also gets that wrapped around his wrist and across the front, kind of like a faux series of brass knuckles. And again, I like, much like the helmet, that there's imperfections to it. You can see how they've just been chipped and kind of scarred from several different things he's probably punched through, several different people as well the Juggernaut has punched his way through. The coloring is nice on the flesh tone, so it's not simply just a light color to flesh. He's kind of got like a darker tan color. Well, it doesn't seem like it's all consistently one color. If you have the light hitting it just the right places, you kind of see where it's a little bit more solid in some areas, and a little bit lighter in others. Again, probably what they have done is they've kept a lighter coloring of plastic, probably like this color right here, and then they just painted over top of it. You can almost even see the brush strokes of the additional paint that's been added to like the bicep sections. Spinning around to the very large sized, could you imagine if this guy wore jackets? How big this jacket would be. He probably would be one of the only few mutants, there's probably a couple of them other than Juggernaut, that would probably have to go to a camping store to get tents, literally, just that would fit his frame. I can't imagine he'd be going to a big and tall place to be finding a jacket that suits his size. He'd have to go to the really, really big and the really, really tall store. And those closed down a long time ago because business, other than the few people coming in to pick up the clothing, really, it wasn't catering to a large enough market. Spinning the figure around, and again, you've got some nice dry brushing of darker black added there. In fact, the only place that doesn't seem to get any bit of that, of all places, and I draw your attention to Juggernaut's behind, it's his behind. He doesn't have anything on it. It's just, I guess, the original bare bones coloring of the plastic, which is perfectly fine. It seems to get a little bit more of it in the front, and I guess his behind, they just felt the need not necessarily to add anything to the back of it. I mean, paint from head to toe. This guy has been afforded certainly the weight of all the plastic that was made to produce such a figure, but he also gets all the amount of paint that's been added to the figure as well. Like, there's a lot of stuff that pops on this particular figure simply because the paint is that good. Let's have a look at this guy's posability. His head rotates back and forth. It's technically on a ball joint, although you don't get a whole lot of clearance. You only really get about that much to work with. That results in the head moving down and the head moving up, but again, you're not really going to get much happening that way. The head rotates back and forth. The upper torso is on a ball joint, although it doesn't hinge up and down as much, but it does certainly rotate back and forth. The lower torso is pretty much relegated to sculpt, so there's not going to be a whole lot happening there. The legs split out at about a 45-degree angle. They can move forward, they can move back. He has a swivel on the top cut of the thigh, basically where it attaches to the ball socket there. He has a single hinge on the knee, and he doesn't have articulation in the top boot sections, but he most definitely has articulation in the feet, hinging up and down, and you can also rock them slightly back and forth. For the arms hinge outward quite generously, actually. I mean, if you wanted to do a giant clothesline with Juggernaut, you can certainly pull off such a feat. And you can also move the arms forward. You can move the arms back. He has a swivel on the biceps section of his arm, a single hinge on the elbow, and he doesn't have any articulation in the hands. Ideally, he hits all those marks, no pun intended, for what I would want for a Juggernaut figure. It's baffling to the fact I even got rid of this guy in the first place, because I would probably consider him to be one of my top 10 favorite figures of all time. Certainly does beg the question, if he's one of your top 10 favorite figures of all time, why would you part ways with him? And the answer is, I was silly. I was a silly goose and sold off a lot of my collection back then, thinking I really didn't necessarily need a figure like this. Oh boy, that seems to be the story of my life. And since recently, you probably noticed a lot of these videos where I utter the words, I had certainly seller's remorse. I sold this guy the first go around, kicked myself for doing that. And thank goodness for the folks over at Diamond Select for redistributing this guy at local comic book stores. I got the second chance I was hoping to get Juggernaut back in my collection. I got the second chance to be able to still buy this guy at retail price for about the $35 price point, which I think is more than worth it for how much Juggernaut you get with a figure like this. Now, just to put things in perspective, one thing I did mention in this review was the price point for Juggernaut. Don't worry, there's not going to be a test. I'm not going to grade you guys on your retention of the information I supplied over the course of this review, so I'll just outright tell you. Juggernaut has been restocked as one of the Marvel Select figures now hitting store shelves again. They've also restocked a couple of the Green Hulks, the Red Hulk, and Carnage, to name a few. So if those are figures that you never got a chance to pick up, or like myself, had picked it up and got rid of them for one silly reason or another, you can luckily go back to your comic book store and pick them up as they're currently stocking them once again right now. Just to put things in perspective, though, a lot of companies will challenge collectors who question the price points skyrocketing a lot of their figures. Companies will generally say the price of producing figures have increased, the materials cost more, and therefore they have to justify the increase in prices. But just to put things in perspective, Marvel Select figures have gone up a few dollars, yes. But for the price point of what you're paying for a character like Juggernaut, and then you look at the neighboring figure next door from a Marvel Legends line, the figure from Marvel Legends is on average about the same price, if not sometimes more, than Juggernaut. I've seen a few examples of 2-packs of Marvel Legends at places like Toys R Us for over $100, and that works out to be about a $50 price point for each figure. Now you look at those figures, and you look at Marvel Select. Personally speaking, and maybe I am biased about the whole thing, I would rather spend my money and get a big, meaty-sized Juggernaut like this versus spending a little bit more and getting a figure much smaller in scale and not as good paint, if you ask me. Juggernaut was also certainly available as a build-a-figure for the Marvel Legends line, and I did do a review of that, as far as I know, but I still would put my money on getting Juggernaut here from Marvel Select versus the build-a-figure from Marvel Legends, the one that was released a few years ago. Which figure do you like more? Let me know down below in the comments section. And again, if you guys did want to pick up Juggernaut once again and missed your chance the first go around, don't go on eBay. That's silly. That is ridiculous. Don't go on eBay and don't pay the inflated prices. Go back to your comic book store, because this guy's being stocked right now. Today we were having a look, and a relook, if you will, at the Diamond Select Marvel Select Juggernaut Special Collector's Edition figure. Display stand is kind of hokey, but the actual figure itself more than makes up for it. I could easily say not only it's one of the best Marvel Select figures ever released, but it's one of my top 10 favorite figures of all time. Yes, it does certainly beg the question, why would you even sell this guy in the first place? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I sold him while I was asleep. Somebody crept into my room, whispered in my ear, "Do you want to sell the Marvel Select Juggernaut?" And I probably just said, "Huh? What? Yeah. And that's the best answer I could come up with, because why oh why would I ever want to part ways with such a cool looking figure like this? If you are new to this channel or a long-time viewer, maybe never got around to it, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below periodically as well. Swing on over to the homepage and see if there's anything brewing over there, because I certainly have a lot of videos coming up on a regular basis. You don't want to be the person that's been missing out this whole time. We're going to have a bunch of Diamond Select reviews also lined up to this channel coming soon, so keep your peepers peeled for that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.